Well, some of them are walking with an auto man today. Now when I ask her what's the matter, this is what I heard her say. I see you later, alligator.
The music was louder and the issues more intense than during the previous decade. When the 60s started, kids in America were dancing the twist, made popular by Chubby Checker.
Can't you see you clap my style?
Civil rights, assassinations, and an unpopular war set against a British music invasion, long hair, love beads, and a massive outdoor concert. This was the 1960s. In 1960, America elected John F. Kennedy, a young president whose assassination shattered an era of optimism. And the turbulent decade ended just before two deadly days at Kent and Jackson State universities. The 60s would drag Americans kicking and screaming into the modern era. The 1954 United States Supreme Court decision in Brown versus Board of Education is among the most significant judicial events in the history of our country. The local NAACP assembled a group of 13 parents who agreed to become plaintiffs on behalf of their 20 children. They attempted to enroll the kids into previously all-white schools and were all denied. Brown versus Board of Education dismantled the legal basis for racial segregation in school and other public facilities. But the case was not simply about children and education. It had far-reaching social and ideological implications, which are still with us today. Since the end of the Civil War, many organizations had been created to promote the goals of racial justice and equality in America, but progress was slow. It was not until the 1960s that the effort would draw enough attention to set real change in motion. There was little consensus on how to achieve these ends on a national level. The NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, and Dr. Martin Luther King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference all endorsed peaceful methods and believed in working within the established systems.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
Other organizations, such as the Nation of Islam, the Black Nationalist Movement, and the Black Panthers Party, advocated violent change and a separation of races. There were numerous rallies, marches, strikes, riots, and confrontations with police during the 1960s. Dr. King and Malcolm X would be assassinated. Violence would claim lives of young and old, black and white. The judicial system would be mocked in cases of crimes committed by whites against blacks. Restaurants, hotels, school systems, and other public institutions were largely still segregated in the early 60s, and educational and employment opportunities for minorities were seriously lacking. Coincidentally, the black community, in its very public struggle, began to rely on the support of whites, morally at least. This was the key of the nonviolent movement. Many involved in the equally visible hippie movement took up the civil rights cause, often into the streets. Hippie was the term used to describe the rebellious young people of the 1960s. A large majority of the civil rights movement was carried out by students.
Already standard in jet aircraft, highway uses of the economical turbines are under study. And here's a dream car for the turbine age, designed by Chrysler, and with an Italian crafted body. It incorporates the most advanced design concepts of our day. Much of the design was inspired by jet aircraft principles. A host of new safety features include, for high-speed turnpike cruising, a deceleration air flap. The turbine motor can burn any fuel, including kerosene, for maximum economy. A vision of things to come on the highways.
At the International Inventors Exhibition, a would-be robber is foiled by an uncooperative desk, which folds so he can't silently steal away. The newest-looking telephones, totally electronic and thoroughly portable since it has no connecting cord. For the not-so-nautical-minded, anti-seasick seats, the answer to a weekend skipper's prayer, not to mention his guests. The tiniest sewing machine in town, operated by thumb pressure. An occasional table, perfect for any occasion. Reason, it's convertible, separating into several tables. This year's triumphs by the Leonardo da Vinci's of today.
The whole world is watching. This was one of the mantras heard during the anti-war movement sparked by the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. American military advisors were first committed to Vietnam during the Eisenhower administration. Beginning in 1959, the U.S. began to send troops to South Vietnam and continued its military presence until roughly 1975. The U.S. military effort in Vietnam was dramatically escalated in 1965 when Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution authorizing President Lyndon Johnson to expand the war. Most Americans believed that the war would be easily won by the U.S. As time dragged on and progress was slow and painful for Americans, support for the war effort dropped. Protests around the country became prominent, and pressure was applied to our government to end the conflict. By 1973, President Nixon negotiated a settlement with the communist North Vietnamese, and U.S. troops were brought home, marking the end of the Vietnam War. Shortly afterwards, the North Vietnamese overran the South and established a communist government. Containment had failed. At that time, U.S. foreign policy was guided by a belief in the domino theory, meaning that if one country in a region would fall to communist control, then neighboring countries would follow. For many Americans, the Vietnam War defined the 1960s as much as the Beatles.
I've been waiting so long to be where I'm going, in the sunshine of your love.
The teens of the 60s were witnesses to gut-wrenching political assassinations, a prolonged war, protests, changing moral behavior, and growing cynicism. The legendary Woodstock concert was an attempt by young people to show the power of peace through music. It was a decade which began with optimism, where a president asked not what a country could do for us, but what we could do for our country, where notions of peace, love, and understanding heard in the 60s music lost out to reality. For Snapshot, I'm Craig Marbury.